All right. Hello and welcome to another series of our Platform Foundation Academy. This is, let me lie, I think the seventh
I
session.
I think it's 7.
It's the seven already. Time flies when you're having fun, right? So today we have two really brand new things to show you, right? And before we get into technology, I want to introduce one of our new colleagues, Kiernan. Welcome, Kiernan, to the show.
How are you? Glad to be on board.
Glad to have you here, Kiernan. As you're new to the crew here, do you want mind to introduce yourself real quick?
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm Kieran McMorrow. I am an outbound product manager here at ServiceNow. Just coming to ServiceNow from working in the partner space for the last 6 years or so. And I've had a concentration primarily working in kind of the service portal space for the last five or so years.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very excited to have you on the team. When you said you have two new things, I was like, is Kieran one of them?
Thing is necessarily, right? But two new topics or areas or something to mention, absolutely. Andrew, you want to go next? I guess most people know you, but still good to quickly.
Sure. Hi, I'm Andrew Barnes. I am an outbound product manager on this awesome team here in our Creator Workflows business unit. And I love helping platform owners and developers get the most out of the ServiceNow platform. So that's what I do.
Awesome. And well, finally me, Daniel, I'm the host or the presenter of today's show. I'm also an outbound product manager here in the Creator Workflow business unit next to Andrew. Been here for, I don't know, eight something years, 10 years in the ecosystem. So plenty of work in ServiceNow. And I'm really excited for today's topic. That's something, Andrew, I think we had lots of discussions around that in the last couple of months since we are one team, right?
We have.
I think I'm not lying if I say this is probably number one request we have received around automated test framework of the last months. So let's
it is certainly been a pain point for a while that we're happy to officially remediate now.
Awesome. So let's dive into the topic. The topic is headless browser for automated test framework. Brand new with the Rome release that is out since, I believe, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, something like that, as general availability. So you customers, you can already start using that features. It's out there. It's not something about the future. It's really something that is available as of now. So let's start with what is a headless browser for ATF and why do we need that? When you're running ATF, that's our automated test framework, right? Where you automatically test your functionality, your configuration, your customization to the platforms. And you want to test the UI side of things. So something that runs in the browser, that's presented, that's displayed. Then you, up to now, would need to have a scheduled client test runner up and running on a machine so that we can remote control this test runner and do all the UI interactions that you kind of simulate with ATF. This kind of, the burden behind that is you need to have that test runner running before you start your automated test. So if you want to get your automated test kind of fully automated, built into a pipeline or running overnight or something like that, and that's kind of difficult, right? You need a server somewhere, somebody needs to monitor that piece and on all the clunkiness around it. There's at least one that I know of, implementation out on GitHub, how to do that, right? But nothing supported by ServiceNow up to Rome. So the use cases, when do we actually need that automatic headless browser? And I briefly mentioned them just now. One is if you run something like a CICD pipeline, right? So if you automatically deploy changes from a dev to a test to a production, and you want to do that really fully automated, you want to have your ATFs being run in the same time as you deploy, or basically just post-deployment, run these tests, validate that everything is fine, and then you move on with your deployment. You might even want to run instant scan, which we discussed last week. Or you run maybe a different schedule and want to have a scheduled test run every night, like a nightly build, right? If you're a full stack developer, you would check in your code, go home, and the next morning you get the test result. So you know exactly, was my code good or bad? If the test is fast enough, you might even wait for it, right? But if you run large scale tests, then this will take a few hours to complete. and you don't want to sit there and wait. So, and then we have customers doing that, running like 3,000-4,000 tests every night. That's another great use case where this automated version or this headless version of a browser comes in very handy. What do you think of any other, Andrew? Did I miss something?
So, just responding to different actions in the pipeline. So I can run a test against every commit if I wanted.
Absolutely.
So that's when you have a pipeline set up, the amount of places in which you could run a test really get to raising up the possibilities, because you can respond to any number of things. You could run an ATF based off of an incident coming into production. You run an ATF in a sub-production instance. I like the times you could run an ATF case when you have a fully automated test suite. The world becomes available to you then, right? I did have a question for you though, Daniel.
Sure.
And I sort of a teed up question in my brain here is, are there ATFs that don't need to use this headless runner or the client test runner?
Don't need. Let me think about what you refer to. We don't need. Basically, you can trigger. And oh yes, yeah. Okay, now I think where you're heading to. If you have a purely server-side ATF test suite or test which runs just like queries and stuff on the database, they would not need a headless browser. Absolutely, you only need it when there is a client or user interface interaction, something where you want to render on the screen and click a button and validate that certain changes happen on the screen that a user would see. That's where you need a headless browser. Absolutely. So everything server side, you wouldn't need it.
So would you say that I should have some that are client side and I should have some that are server side tests? Should I break up my process in that manner when I'm building these, or should I not care? Or do you have any thoughts on like the structure of those ATFs? I know it's not directly related to the headless browser, but sort of adjacent.
Yeah, kind of. It gets into the best practices, how to design your tests and suites and cases, right? So yeah, absolutely. Actually, I would say if you can break apart your tests, some customers do really long end-to-end tests, right? Taking a service catalog example, opening, requesting something catalog, running the approval and the task and everything underneath, or that comes downstream in one test. And I would say that's actually a difficult test to maintain, to create, and to update going forward. So break that apart into multiple smaller tests and have these smaller tests, we come back to the pipeline, run more often, more frequently, gives you a more stable result as you deploy your code. And as you break it down, you might also think about breaking down server side and client side. Absolutely. The client side might only be tested once, whereas on servers, you can run multiple parameterized versions of the same test. If it worked once in the client, there's probably no need to run the same thing just with another catalog item, something like that. Right? Absolutely.
Oh, that makes sense. Thanks so much for that.
All right, so let's move forward with our headless browser. How does the headless browser work? What do we need also from you? What do you as a customer need out there to have this up and running? So we still need that browser somewhere. We call it headless, so we don't see it. That's why it's named headless, but we still need it, right? We still need a browser engine to render a screen, take screenshots if we need to, or if we want to. And that browser, we decided to put on a Docker host. So what you as a customer need, if you take on that slide on the right-hand panel, you need that Docker host, right? You need a host where we can host our headless browser on. We ship or we provide the headless browser as a Docker image that you can supply there and service. And once you have set up the connection between the host and the ServiceNow instance, we will start and stop that headless browser, that container, anytime we need it. And as part of that session today, we will go through what you need to do. I'm not installing it right now, but I'll show you my installation and show you some of the bits and pieces that you need to know how to set it up, right? So you will need a machine, virtual machine, physical machine, doesn't really matter that much, where you install a Docker host that we can supply you the image. And that Docker host needs to have a connection to the ServiceNow instance, because the instance needs to talk to the host saying, hey, start, stop, I'm ready. and things like that. So we need a connection between the two. So somewhere there's probably a firewall in between. So you need to work with the firewall rules to make that connection happening. We are actually using the Docker spoke, which is part of Integration Hub. And a good point here probably to make is the Docker spoke typically is a licensable product. It's not in the starter edition of Integration Hub. So you would need to have Enterprise or Pro, if I'm not mistaken. However, the calls to our headless browser are for free. So you do not need to worry that this is containing some licenses, transactions cost for you. Right? So even if you don't have that higher priced package of Integration Hub, you can still use the headless browser as free of charge.
Oh, that's good to know. So you talked about that there might potentially be a firewall there. When you're thinking about where you should place this Docker image, do you have any thoughts on, like, should you try and put it, you know, in your data center if you've got a data center, like, or is that important?
The only connection that this Docker host will need is one, ServiceNow needs to reach out to that host to start and stop the container, and the running container finally needs an HTTPS connection to the instance to open the browser or to render the pages and get the information. So basically, wherever you have that host, doesn't really matter. It could be in an Amazon cloud or Azure cloud outside your data center, right? It's just we as ServiceNow, we don't provide that host. You need to have that host somewhere. Having it in your data center might actually cause additional complexities in terms of firewalling, but maybe within a cloud data center somewhere at Azure, whatever, you're much more easy to get that set up maybe.
Oh, that makes sense to me. If I don't need access to my internal resources, then maybe I don't need this to be running in an internal network and resources.
Correct.
It makes sense to me. Thanks.
Absolutely, yeah. But I get to that also, the communication from ServiceNow to that Docker host, we are using a certificate-based authentication. So we're really making sure that it's only ServiceNow who is allowed to talk to the Docker host, so nobody else can start or stop your headless browsers or do anything else on that Docker host, right? But so I'll get to that as we move forward. Okay. So how does it look from a process point of view? When you run an ATF test or a test suite, how does that headless browser get invoked? When does that happen, and how do we do it? So we have the ServiceNow instance on the top swim lane here, and we basically get two triggers coming in for an ATF, and these are the two use cases and scenarios we talked about. It's either a schedule where you run it on a nightly, weekly, whatever kind of pattern that you have. You can also trigger the schedule manually if you want to, right? Or you have a CICD, a pipeline, and basically an API call coming to the instance saying, please start a test. Right? These are the two input triggers that you can use. The headless browser will never be invoked if a user is manually clicking start test suite. So if you go into ATF, click test, start, execute your suite, it would still use the client test runner as you know it before. Even if you have a headless one, it will still use the traditional or existing client head runner, a client test runner. So only when it's triggered by API or schedule, we'll go to the headless mode.
But potentially, if that's something that you wanted to do, you could add to the UI action there to launch it from API.
You could create your own UI action, absolutely. You would just basically need to trigger the API and start the API, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just
I'm not necessarily advising that, but you know, we know what the limitations are, and if you want to work around those, go for it.
You can get creative on this end, absolutely. There's no technical limitation on why we do it. We just think if you're sitting there clicking that test now button, you probably want to see the results, right? So that's kind of
I mean, you are in a client right then, might as well use yours.
Exactly. That's the reason behind, right? And if we think out a little bit towards the future, that client test runner will be extended with new features like a debugger, for example, coming someone in the future. That won't work in headless, right? You can't debug in headless mode because there's just nobody sitting at that.
Yeah, there's nothing to there's nothing to see.
Exactly. So we have that trigger that comes in, starting a schedule, a test in a headless mode. At that moment in time, the ServiceNow instance will have some logic to figure out, do we actually need a client test runner as the first piece, right? So do we have some client steps? And if yes, is there a runner available already? Do we have one? And it's looking typically for operating system and the browser. So you could run on Windows or in Linux or in Chrome or Firefox or whichever you want to, right? If it doesn't find one, it will send a command to the Docker host, hey, please start my container. Docker host will start up. That headless browser will actually log into the instance, report its availability, I'm here, and then the instance can continue, execute the test. And once everything is complete, the test is done, we're sending another call to the Docker host saying, we're done, shut down that host, or stop, not the host, stop that image, that container. So that also means we are dynamically allocating resources on your Docker host. It's not that you need a resource pool of 5 hosts or whatever machine. We are dynamically starting and stopping these different headless runners. And we have a certain limitation of how much of them we run in parallel, right? So there's a parameter, a property we can set, basically defining how capable is your host of running multiple sessions in parallel. You probably get limited when at the virtual or physical limits of your host, as browsers tend to take quite some memory these days. But theoretically, you can run multiple of these in parallel and they wouldn't hurt each other. Okay, so now that we know how it works, let's see where you find the things that you need to get it installed in your environment, right? So you need automated test framework, that's clear, right? We want to run a headless test, so we need ATF. That's activated by all instances anyway.
You need a ServiceNow instance.
Oh yeah,
Come
you need
on.
yeah, I could have put that in first.
Why would I need a ServiceNow instance to do ServiceNow testing? Yeah, all right.
That's good. A little less obvious is probably the Docker spoke, right? A Docker spoke, you will need that to communicate with your Docker host. And if you've been upgrading from a previous release into Rome, that spoke might not be there because it's not activated by default on all instances. If you have been using it, okay, then it's there. But if not, you'll need to go out and activate that spoke from the plugins list to make sure it's available. If you start on Rome, if you're a new customer, it will automatically be active. We have changed that flag. So new instances provisioned will be having the Docker spoke already. And you need our Docker image, right? As I said, our headless browser image for Docker, if you want to put it completely. There's a link here and you'll get that down in the video description. Go into GitHub, ATF Headless Runner. That's the package that we ship. It includes a Chrome and a Firefox if you run it on Linux. If you run it on Windows, it only has Chrome. With Firefox and Windows, we probably have some things to fix, or Firefox has them to fix, I don't know, but at least on Windows, we only support Chrome these days. On Linux, you get Chrome and Firefox. It includes all the libraries. We are basically using robot language here in the robot framework, which starts up the Chrome or Firefox browser, whatever you choose, and makes the communication happening. It is a open sourced GitHub repository. So if for whatever reason you look at that and think, well, that's just not working for me, you can take it and change it and modify it to your needs. The package is out there. Well, we probably would advise don't deviate too far from it, right? If we develop further, you'll need to catch up with what we do. But at least the options and the possibilities are there for you to change it.
Nice. Well, yep, you covered this.
Yeah, I covered that already. We talked about it, right? Linux gives you more options. Windows gives you less options. Windows is also a bit picky when you are about to install the Docker, the engine, basically. We have best experience with that noted version down here of Windows Server 2019. Feel free to use something else, but you might run into some quirks that we have seen or have not seen and have not documented, maybe. So we advise you to use the Linux one. It's just the one that we've been more experienced with. So now let's move into a demo and show how it works, and then we get to some of the funky details. Would that be great?
That would be great. I'm curious as to what you're actually going to show for a demo for a headless browser.
That'd be fun, right? How to show something as you see nothing, right? So we have, or I have, oh, actually, I should share my screen, right? You're still seeing the wrong screen here. That is,
I actually got a request the other day for, doing a headless browser demo, and I was like, what do they want me to show?
Now you will see what I can show them, and then maybe that gives you the idea.
We are coming up on spooky season, so next time maybe we'll theme it ghost themed, right?
I've actually seen a funny picture of a headless, that's a headless knight or headless rider, that spooky tail, and they put like in hands the browser logos as like the headless browser.
I love it.
That's funny. We could do that for Spooktober or Hacktober, absolutely. So we have a ServiceNow instance. Yeah, that's great. And we have, there's a host. I got a Linux. Actually, let me log into my host. That's the wrong machine. There you go. You don't need to hide that. There's no password to be seen. So that is my Docker host. Just make sure I have full access here. If I would go here for like a Docker command, you can see I'm kind of running a Docker command. Docker PS shows me what is running on the Docker host. And we can actually see there is a mid server running. So it might be another feature later on in another session. We have a containerized mid server nowadays. So we can host the mid server on the same host as your headless browser if you want to. But we have Docker running here. We have an instance. And you trust me that the plugin, the Spoke, Docker Spoke.
Yeah, you activated the Docker plugin?
Yeah, I did activate the Docker plugin. So let's go the very simple demo case, first test case. Let's go into ATF. Without the blanks, I guess. Where is it? There we go. There we got all the ATF things. We get tests and suites and stuff, and we'll dive into the properties in a second. We said we'll need a schedule. So I have here one schedule for incident management, reopening an incident copy schedule, which runs my new test suite. Let's have a quick look into the test suite so we see what's doing. It does have a test inside. Ooh, reopening an incident. Who thought about that? And if we look at that, that's like 28 steps going through a whole bunch of server-side things, record insert, impersonate, but it also does open an existing record in a form, setting some field values, clicking a UI action. So we have client-side interactions. We need a browser to actually execute that. Let's execute that one and see what happens. If we go back to our suite schedule, oh, that was too far. Okay, forward, here we go. That's our suite schedule. So if I now click execute now, you actually can see that it says starting headless client test runner. So everything has been prepared obviously here and it's working. So it's now waiting for that headless browser to crank up and get working. If I would log in back to my Docker host here and look on PS,
which you're not overly concerned with, how fast the Docker image spins up.
It's a black box.
You're not paying attention to it.
Exactly. Yeah. But we can see here it's already, it started already. We have here the headless runner for Linux. It's already starting. It'll take a few seconds to log into the instance and be ready and things like that. So if we go back here, we see here some countdown. You can configure the countdown depending how slow or fast your machine is. I'll expect that to kick in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 countdowns. And then we'll see, just as you would execute any other tests, we see the bar, there we go. We see the bar going up. We could actually close that because it's running in the dark, right? I don't need to watch it. I can just say, it's running, I don't care. I go home or whatever. If that's
you have faith, you believe, it's running, it's good.
Exactly.
I'm happy with that too.
So
while that's running and we're gonna get working on our results, I've got a question from the QA panel here, which is, who should own ATFs? Is it the developers, the QA team, product team, central platform team?
Ooh, that's
who should own ATF?
Yeah, that is a good question and one that I think strongly debated. From what we have been seeing at customers, we basically see two patterns, and both of them have their pros and cons. And let me give you the patterns and what I recommend, right? The two patterns is one, you have a dedicated QA or test team that owns all the ATFs and sets them all up, runs them and all that. And the other one is that the developer should own the tests. As they develop also the tests. And I think both have their pros and cons, right? And if you have basically a second set of eyes with a QA team, they just look differently at the code and might test different cases. Whereas if the developer does that, he thinks about creating the tests before he develops, so he develops differently. That sounds like it's taking him more time, but actually what we see, it's not taking him more time. It's actually, as he thinks differently and embeds the automated tests, it's speeding his work up, as he doesn't need to test manually every update that he does, right? So both of them have their pros and cons. I personally believe the developer should own the tests for the stuff he writes. You could see that as a unit testing, or maybe a bit towards test-driven development, but they should own what they write to test that, what they code to also test that. A QA team then can see like the end-to-end process and the overall management of when are tests executed and how do results look like.
That seems reasonable. Well, thanks for that, Daniel. So I typed that answer in the QA panel to save it as well.
Awesome.
But thanks for that. Do we have a done test?
Let's refresh our screen. It's still running there. It was 28 steps, right? So if we get into that, we see some screenshots already appearing. So the client is acting, right? So how off are we? Step results 28. So we are pretty much done, I would think, right? It's still status running, but we already have screenshots. So let's open a screenshot, right? So we download that screenshot, open it. I probably need to move it somewhere into the space. This is actually a pretty huge screenshot, as you can see. Right? Maybe open that window a bit. That was too far. That is a pretty long, darn screenshot, but it has been happening from the headless browser in the dark. And another thing we can see here from the Rome release is actually that we can do screenshots that large. In the past, you couldn't really do that easily. So there are properties where your screenshots can automatically adjust to the size of the content. Which is one of the use cases here. Whereas in the past, it would probably just cut off somewhere on the defined dimensions that you set out for ATF to run or the client test runner to run.
So we had a question in the chat about, is Mac OS supported for running this Docker image?
Actually, Mac OS is basically a Linux version. If you get your Docker up and running, you should be able to host the image. I haven't tried it, to be honest. And if I look back into the slide deck, I don't think we list Mac OS, but basically it's just
which means we're not officially supporting it, but could it work?
Yeah, probably.
Maybe.
I would expect yes. Chrome and Firefox run on Mac, right? And the Linux underneath the operating system is behaving pretty much the same. So yeah, why not? I would think it should work the same way. And that might be a great idea if you have like a Mac Mini sitting downstairs or in your data center somewhere, which actually my host is a Mac Mini. It's just running Debian, not Mac OS anymore. Right. All right, our test is completed. We
Success.
have test has passed. And if we refresh, let's see how many screenshots we have. You see 17 screenshots have been made. That is amazing, right? We have actually we didn't need to do anything. If you take any of the other screenshots, just for the sake of, that's another very long one. Did I hit the same one? No, I don't think so. But we had another very long screenshot in here, and the quality is pretty nice. So yeah, it was running just fine and executing what we asked it to do.
So speaking of screenshots, is there, should I always be taking screenshots? Well, I'm teeing this one up for you pretty easy.
Well, if you want to have your tests running slow and consuming a lot of storage on the instance, yes. No, taking the screenshot is taking time, especially the new screenshots that we have with the very long one and the high quality ones. They'll take even more time than the ones we did before, right? So they make your test definitely slower than without screenshots, and they take up storage in your instance as we upload the images back as attachments to the test suite or the test, right? So personally, the recommendation there is only take screenshots when needed. So when something breaks and something fails, and there's a property to be set in the ATF properties where you can switch the behavior when to take screenshots. The default is only take it on failure. Obviously, for this demo, I took screenshots everywhere because I want to see screenshots. I want to show that it's actually running.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to throw you a little softball.
Yeah, fine, that's fine. Have you got your idea what to demo next time you need to demo a headless browser? Do you have now an idea of what you can demo next time you need to do a demo to a customer of a headless browser? As you said, you were thinking about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I didn't realize that you were framing that as a question. Yes.
Sorry.
but it also was just mostly a joke. Like, what are you going to show?
Yeah.
It's over there doing its thing. I'm waiting for it.
Just seeing a question popping in here. Will this allow to run multiple ATF suites in Dev IT and UAT all at the same time? Currently can only run 2 suites if you have 2 active screens. Yeah, okay. So reading your Dev IT and UAT seems to be 2 instances, right? So from what I read, not sure, maybe you can clarify that, but it seems to be 2 instances. As soon as you link both instances to a Docker host, and it can actually be the same, it doesn't really matter, then yes, you can start up test suites on both sides, and both of them will talk to the Docker host and start their own containers with a headless browser. The thing that you need to take care of is the credentials to log into the instance. As it's the same image, it uses the same credentials for both instances, so you need to have the same username and passwords on both sides. 3 instances, okay, 3 instances, yeah, 3 works the same way, right? Just your Docker host probably needs to be bigger, as it potentially runs 3.
Or you can do more of them.
Or more of them, absolutely. You can separate them out in different ones, in the same ones. That technically works just fine. I'm actually, to my Docker host that I use here, I have hooked up 2 instances. So 2 instances, as I don't do a lot of testing, right? I'm not a full-time developer anymore. That's very fine enough for me. It works just fine. It's just a resource question on the Docker host, how many of these are actually working in parallel nicely, let's say. All right, so let's get my presentation forward again. That should be here, and talk about what do you need to do to get there? What is it to install and to operate a headless browser? So we already talked about we need a ServiceNow instance and the Docker host. And there are a couple of steps you run through. They are all in the docs. There's a link on the bottom of that page to the docs page where we have detailed out how to install the things and how to get through it. So I will not go command by command, but I will show you the different pieces and what that actually means. And we'll start off on the Docker host. That's the first thing we'll need, right? So once you have your Linux machine or Windows machine, you need to install Docker. We provide an example on our docs page how to do it, but you can also get just to the Docker homepage, which I happen to have open here, and look for install Docker on Debian, for example, on CentOS, on Fedora, on Ubuntu. And that's coming back to the macOS question. Docker doesn't host instructions for macOS. But if you look out for Homebrew or something like that, I think, what is the other one? Mac ports, you might find it there and you can install Docker on your Mac. And once it's running, you should be able to continue. I would recommend look whatever operating system you have, look up the documentation and go through the standard installation to get basically the package control content and get that installed. On my host, what I basically followed was exactly that. If I clear that out to see something, and then I prepared obviously my commands that I want to type to show you that, as I don't remember them all. But if I, for example, look, I just installed it via apt. You can see apt list installed a Docker CE buster, rootless buster, and that was just what I had to install based on the documentation that's out there in the Docker page. That gives you Docker and it's up and running in your environment.
And one piece of advice is, if you're using ServiceNow in your organization, you're a relatively large organization. There's already other folks in your organization that are already familiar with Docker. If you, the ServiceNow developer and team, are not, seek out, one of your peers that already has some experience with it. They already might be running a whole bunch of Docker images and, can host your image for you. So don't try and do everything yourself. Reach out to folks that have already experience in your organization for that.
Very good comment, Andrew. Absolutely. Most large organizations have some form of Docker experience somewhere in the organization, not necessarily in the ServiceNow team. That's pretty new there, but somewhere else they probably have it. And maybe you can jump on an existing host. They are the only caveat that probably they might not be too happy about. If you get to an existing host, you need to expose that host so ServiceNow can talk to it. And that means we could basically start and stop any container or image that is on that host, right? So they might want to separate their other Docker hosts from the ServiceNow Docker. Could happen just for security reasons. All right. So once we have that Docker, we need to have certificates to communicate, to make sure that the communication between ServiceNow and our Docker host is as secure as you can be. I'm not creating the certificates here. There's a bunch of commands on the docs page with OpenSSL and stuff like that. If you follow them very closely, they actually work. Another thing, if you're a large organization, you might have an internal PK, IT, and key management department team that will hand out these certificates. So again, shout out, talk to them and see what you need before you go out and create them all yourself. Our docs page is having the steps to create them yourself, a so-called self-signed certificate, not needing any trust or payments. It'll work, but within your organization, you probably have some rules to follow for certificates. Once you have the certificates, we need to install them on the Docker host and on the instance. So for Docker, and I just had again, show you where I have that. So there's one setting in Docker, which is, in my case, it's the etc docker daemon.json, where you need to specify what are my keys, my private keys, and the trust authority that I need. So you need to link the certificates that you have generated here in that daemon file, so Docker knows about these certificates, and you need to activate TLS to make sure it's actually in use. Right? As soon as you have done that, all the Docker commands, like we did before, the Docker PS, will not work anymore because they don't know the certificates. They need to follow the same pattern. So you need to set up something for your command line utilities so they work the same way. And the way that that is done is basically, if I export Docker, no, that was not what I wanted. Yeah. So just put it like that. In my case, what I had to do is I need to export a variable called Docker host, which knows where my host is and tell them to use TLS. And you have to create a folder called Docker, where you again have the keys. So here you need basically the public key. That's the same key that my ServiceNow instance is using. So I know exactly the key is actually working. Before I'm uploading to ServiceNow, I use the same key here, which is that cert.pem, I believe. But they need to be in that directory with that name. That's all on our docs page. But you need to pay close attention as you follow the steps. I made a mistake, named the file wrong, and it didn't work, and it cost me hours of loss, right? Because just a file name. As you try to go through it. And it needs to be exactly like that. So look at the docs page. It's mentioned there if you read closely, and then you'll find that note there. With that, your Docker host is almost ready. The only thing that you also need is activating the API so that ServiceNow can actually talk to it. And that is done in a file, in my case, systemd system docker service override. That might differ on where you install it, how you install it. Again, that is a Debian version. Look on the Docker page, Docker homepage, how to do that. In my case, it's here, and the parameter it needs is that one, -h, and the TCP address that it needs to listen. 2376 is the port name we're using. That's just any arbitrary port. You could use any port that you want to. Just need to make sure that your firewall knows about that and let ServiceNow talk to that port. Right. That's the setup you need to do on the Docker host to have the API exposed, the TLS encryption being set up, and your Docker is almost ready to run. That can be technical, but if you have your Docker team, your infrastructure team, they should be well aware of how to do things like that. And the last piece you need to do is pull that Docker image. Where do you get that image?
Well, it was in that GitHub.
Exactly. We saw that GitHub link before. So let's open GitHub. GitHub.com. There is a couple of repositories that I have here, but if I look for ATF, no, that was not it. Headless. Need to search here. ServiceNow Headless at ATF Headless Runner. That's the repository. Again, the link will be in the description below. That is our official repository where we host that image. Now, there's a whole bunch of files. You don't need to download all of that. Go to the description, read down the description, and find here, make sure you have Docker installed. Actually, there's installation instruction for macOS. So probably it does work in macOS, right? So we do have them somewhere, just seeing that. The command that we're looking for is actually here, this one. Pull the image, Docker pull and that whole string here. And you need to specify if you want to have the Linux version, the Windows version, which version. Currently, there's only 1.0.0. We'll probably update that version as we need to. But that's the command that you need to run on your Docker host to download the image. I've done that already. So with me, it's there, but that's kind of the command to get to your image downloaded onto
How would I know what version it is?
Make sure you install instruction. There was some link here that explain actually where we have that. Is that this one? No, that was not it. There was a link that explains the tags. No, it doesn't. But you can go basically just to that repository, which is just another URL, and open another browser window. There you go. We end up at this page, which is now that the same.
And there's the options. So I've got win-1.0.0
exactly.
and lin-1.0.0.
Let me zoom in. It's a new tab, right? That might be better. So LIN for Linux, WIN for Windows, and currently we have the 1.0.0 in both sides. And you see here again the full command. You can actually just copy it, take it over to your terminal, and run it, and it will pull the image. Well, mine will probably just say image already there. Yeah, waiting, we're done, right? Operating Windows can't be used. Okay, smart. Smart crank. Okay, that's how you get your image downloaded, and you have the image there, right?
Awesome.
Okay, let's go to PowerPoint. Where's PowerPoint? Here we are. Now, as we have the Docker running, the image is there, certificates, everything there. We are almost ready to use it. Now jump into the ServiceNow instance and see what we need to do to get the connections up and running, right? So we need to upload the certificates, create a protocol, and configure the ATF piece. So let's go to the instance. Up. So let me see, do we have actually a menu for the Docker? No, we don't. Okay, I was just showing if there's a shortcut to do that, but it's not. Profile. System security. So you need to go under system security. The product need to create a profile there, which is this record. You see there's only one in mine, which is very simple. And actually, I gave it my name because that was in the instructions. I'm not really sure if you can change that to something else, but that's what's out there. We use the port. That's the same port that you need to open in your firewall to make the communications, right? And we need to supply the keys, which are here in the key store, ATF Docker client keys. If I navigate to that one, it's just using a standard XO509 certificate. That's in the certificate table where you define your repository, your name, your key store. So you need to create a Java key store, give it a password, and link it there. We can validate it, make sure it works. But that's the certificate being used for this type of security profile. That's basically all you need to do to get the communication for the Docker spoke running. And once you have that, we go to the magic of ATF properties. Too many things here. Properties. Let's jump the application so we can actually see the values a little better. So here we go. Test suite properties. Yes, you need to activate ATF, otherwise you can't execute any of the tests. That's it. Then we get to the screenshot properties a little later. If you scroll more down, we have the test runner properties where you get like timeouts to wait for it, and heartbeat interval, test suites, email properties, and even more further down, we have a new section called Headless Runner Properties. Here you can activate or deactivate the runner. If you turn it off, it will only use the client runner as in the past, right? If you turn it on, then it will try to. You specify which user account is being used when the Docker image, the container, will log in to the ServiceNow instance. I'm using mine. You should probably create your own ATF test account that needs a good that you should specify in here, right? We need to define a Docker secret. Somewhere the Docker image or a headless image needs to know a password, right? Now we don't want to store a password in clear text. So what we actually do is we get onto the Docker host and execute the command. I'll just type it over here. Comment something like that, and echo, you put in your password here. That's not my password, obviously. And pipe that into a command called Docker secret create and call it ServiceNow password. So, or you can name it something else. Our instructions say ServiceNow password. Let's just create something else for the time being so we can execute the command and see what's happening. So I'm not overwriting my password. Jesus. It'll run and you'll get something like that. And that's the string you copy and paste and bring it back in here. Right, so that is how we store securely the password going into ServiceNow. You need to tell it what's the name of that secret. That's an SN password as we had in the command line. So once we start it up, we can find it again. These are the settings you need. You could, if that password file is somewhere awkward in you can still define a pass. That's fine. I didn't need that. And you need to tell him what's the name of the image. If you're using our image, that's the name, right? As you download it. If you take that image and modify it and change it, that name will change. And obviously need to update what that image is that you want to run. Make sure it just connects to the instance and it launches a client runner. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You define what's the default for operating systems and browsers, Linux and Chrome in my case. You could have Windows and Chrome or Linux and Firefox if that's your default. That means this image will start it for any test that says any. If we don't care where that test is executed, we'll use that default one, the Linux and Chrome.
Nice.
There's a timeout setting. You've seen that kind of before when we were waiting for that headless browser to come up. And you tell basically that headless browser where to log in. If you have modified your settings and you're not using login.do because you've kind of hidden that page or something like that or renamed it, then you tell it where that login.do is. And that's all that you need to set up to get your headless browser connected to the instance.
Well, that sounds very useful. We had some good questions that I answered in line. If you want to take a look at those and see if you'd like to add anything to any of the answers I provided, that will be fine.
When we had the should ATF be only used for upgrades? I think we covered that one pretty well, I guess. Big test of per minute versus taking time. Okay. Are ATFs upgrade safe? Yeah, that's one of the whole purposes why we do ATF, right? Are ATFs upgrade safe? Yes, we expect them to be upgrade safe. That's why we recommend using ATF over other tools like Selenium or Automate Pro or Protractor or whatever you have run outside, because they would not know if we change something in our platform. The ATF though, if we change something in the backend, we should make sure that ATF still execute just fine. Awesome.
Well, if you're happy with all of those questions, I think I have exhausted the questions I have for you. Thanks so much for showing this to us today.
You're so welcome. I mentioned the screenshots before. As we have a few more minutes, let's maybe jump quickly to that screenshot properties. Right? We mentioned when you should take screenshots. That's where you can actually configure for all steps or fail steps. Typically, you should say for fail steps, right? But in demo, it's always nice to have them always. And then here are the new features, like a glide screenshot feature. That's a new one. It will be off by default. So even if you're upgraded of a new instance, if you want to have the new screenshots, you need to activate that one. And the second piece is capturing the full page. So it will dynamically resize the screenshot pane to whatever is on that page. These are the two new settings that are introduced with Roam, and important, you need to set them manually. Awesome.
Daniel, could you talk at all to a scenario in which you might not want to capture any sort of screenshots for the ATF test run?
That's actually a good question. My thought would be if I'm running a whole regression test where I run thousands of tests like some customers do every night, you probably don't want the screenshots. If something breaks, you would run that smaller test individually and then create a screenshot. Right? I think that's kind of a scenario that I could think of when it makes sense to turn it off.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, so if I was running, like you said, if I was doing a nightly full regression, or if I was doing something like, every commit kind of scenario where I'm running ATFs, I'd really just want to know that I failed or not, and I might expect failure right then.
Mm-hmm.
So I might just not want any tests to take screenshots because I don't actually need to see them. I just need to get the result of which things passed and which things failed. And like I said, I can even expect a failure. And so the times I want to have the screenshots are when I want to go review the screenshots. And so any other time, I don't need them. So only when I expect to want to see the screenshots should I be taking screenshots, because they take up they take up time and space.
Awesome. I think that's pretty much it. Yep, the presentation ends here at this point. Awesome. We have seen all that is out there to see. Thank you very much for the attention, and maybe we want to launch our final poll to say, start that, to give us a feedback. We really appreciate your feedback. As you said, it's the 7th of the Academy sessions that we run. We hope to get better every time we do it. Let us know if we do. Let us know what we need to do to get better. We have amazing content coming up. Do you know what's the next one, Andrew? Do you have the schedule at hand?
I don't have the schedule at
is.
hand, and I'm-
It is the excitement of subscription management.
Thanks, Adam. I was just about getting to you.
our friend Adam Stout is going to be doing subscription management, and he's here. Awesome.
Thanks, Adam. That will be in 2 weeks' time from now, where the next session will be, same place, same time. The video of this session will be posted to the YouTube channel as usual. It'll just take a few more days, as our favorite friend Lisa is currently enjoying a break, and well, she's back next week, I think Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. She will work on the video and get that posted on the community for you.
She's going to be back to check out subscription management.
Yeah,
vacation
she's
really just for that.
right? No, subscription management is in 2 weeks' time, so she should be ready.
2 weeks.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Any final words?
Well,
Kieran, how was the show?
Fantastic.
I see you upgraded your background there. That's nice.
I need that.
I did
watermark,
indeed.
right?
I don't have the fancy animation like you, Andrew, but I will have to ping you off air to get that.
I'm typically in Rome because we're in the Rome time frame right now. But I saw Daniel's the workflow at screen, and I was like, I want mine. And so I switched to it.
Quickly
All right,
share the
so
results here so you can see the results of what you have voted. Seems like at least you're still liking our sessions. That's awesome. We like that feedback. Length seems to be good. Would you rate it, recommend it to others? Yes, absolutely. Yes, please bring your colleagues and friends next time. The more the merrier, right? We love to have you on the show here.
Yep, and bring your questions. So thank you so much, everyone. We will see you again in 2 weeks, and really appreciate you, Daniel, and have a great and wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.